My name is Elise Cartwright. I'm 36 years old, and I found out the truth about my family from a hospital bed 12 hours after I gave birth to twin girls. My mother did not call to ask how I was. She did not call to ask about the Bobbies. She called to ask whether I had remembered to set up the transfer for the first of the month. Her exact words, spoken in the warm and completely unself-aware tone she has used my entire life. "Honey, it's almost the 31st. Your father's medication bill comes out tomorrow." I had an IV in my left arm and 2 daughters I hadn't yet figured out how to hold at the same time. And my mother was asking about a wire transfer. I told her I'd handle it. I always handled it. That was the entire problem. Welcome to Beyond the Headlights, the channel for people who drove in the dark for so long, reliable and steady and giving, that they never stopped to ask who turned the lights off in the first place. If you have ever been the person everyone leans on until the day you finally bend, this story is for you. Subscribe and drop a comment below telling me about the one person who actually showed up when you needed them. Because as you'll see, sometimes that person is the last one you expected. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is the only place this story makes any sense. I need to tell you who I was before that phone call, because who you are explains everything about how this kind of thing happens to a person. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, the middle of 3 children, which sounds like an unremarkable position until I tell you that my older brother Dean had a learning disability that consumed most of my parents' attention from birth. And my younger sister Paige was born with the kind of easy charm that made strangers stop in grocery store aisles to compliment my mother's genetics. And then there was me, Elise, who got straight A's without being asked, who packed her own lunch by age 9, who figured out the bus route to her first job at 14 and never mentioned it to anyone. I did not do these things to be noticed. I did them because I understood early that the family's bandwidth was completely consumed by Dean's needs and Paige's wants, and that I could either adapt or go without. I adapted. By the time I left for college on a merit scholarship, I had spent 16 years being the most invisible person in a house of 5. My mother used to say it as a compliment. She would tell neighbors, teachers, church friends, "Elise just handles things." As if my self-sufficiency were something she had cultivated, rather than something I had built in the spaces she had left empty. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being praised for your own abandonment. It took me a long time to have language for that. I am giving it to you now in case you recognize it. I went to school for healthcare administration, graduated with honors, took a position at a regional hospital in Nashville, and worked my way up through 7 years of early mornings and quarterly reviews and the particular satisfaction of turning a chaotic revenue cycle into something that actually functions. By 30, I was director of revenue cycle at a 400-bed facility. I managed a department of 22 people. I knew how to read a financial statement the way other people read a novel, fast, for plot, nodding immediately the places where the numbers didn't cohere. I was very good at my job. I was, it turns out, considerably less good at reading the financial statements of my own family. At 27, I received a call from my mother. My father, Robert Cartwright, had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease. He was 58. There was a neurologist in Charlotte, she explained. Medication that was expensive, insurance gaps. Could I help? I said yes, before she finished explaining the gaps. I set up a transfer that month, $2,200. It felt proportionate. I was the one with the salary, the stable job, the benefits. I was the one without dependents. I was the one who handled things. Over the following months, the number grew the way these things always grow, not in one dramatic leap, but in small, reasonable increments, each one with a specific and sympathetic explanation. Dad needed a specialist, then a second opinion, then physical therapy twice a week. Then my mother explained that she'd had to cut her hours at work to manage his appointments, so there was a gap in the household bills. Then there were house modifications, a grab rail, a ramp installation, a bathroom renovation for safety. By the time I was 29, I was sending $3,200 a month. I never said the number out loud. Not to my friends, not to colleagues, not even to Marcus, the man I was dating and would eventually marry. I told myself it was private family business. I told myself I was lucky to be able to help. I told myself that being the one who could carry the weight was its own kind of privilege. I told myself a lot of things. The transfers had their own labeled categories in my banking app. Dad medical, home support, utilities. I set them up as recurring automations, and I did not look at them again. The way you avoid looking at a scar you are quietly hopping will fade. At 31, I married Marcus. At 33, after 2 years of fertility treatment that I funded from my own savings because we did not want to borrow and we did not want help, I became pregnant with twins. And none of it, not the wedding, not the IVF, not the pregnancy, produced a single phone call from my family that was not eventually steered, with varying degrees of subtlety, back toward finances. My mother came to our wedding. She sat in the third row, cried at appropriate moments, and said to me before the reception was over, while I was still in my dress, that the last quarter had been difficult for my father. She pulled me aside near the centerpieces and mentioned it. I told her the transfer would go out as usual. She hugged me and said I was always so reliable. When I got pregnant, I told my family over FaceTime. My mother said how wonderful, and then asked whether the IVF costs had affected my ability to maintain the support payments. Paige, 28 at the time, still living 20 minutes from my parents with no permanent employment, sent a heart emoji. My brother Dean texted congratulations and asked if I'd seen a movie that had just come out. Dean's text was the only one without a subtext. It has always been this way. Dean loves people without calculation, which is perhaps why he is the one family member whose affection I have never had reason to question. I gained 61 pounds carrying twins. I worked until week 36. I went into labor at 5:42 on a Thursday morning, and by 3 in the afternoon I had 2 daughters, Ivy and Clara, 7 minutes apart, both pink and furious and entirely unimpressed with the world they'd arrived in. Marcus was there. His mother flew in from Denver and wept in the waiting room when they told her. My parents sent a teleflora arrangement. It arrived 2 days later. And on the evening of the day my daughters were born, my mother called to ask whether I'd remembered the transfer. I told her I would handle it. I looked at Ivy in the plastic bassinet beside my bed, her tiny fists clenched like she was already preparing arguments, and I thought about the word handle. I had been using it my entire adult life as a synonym for love and as a substitute for the question I had never let myself ask. Why am I always the one handling this? That was the first time in 9 years that the word tasted wrong in my mouth. I did not make any decisions that night. I want to be clear about that. I did not cancel anything. I did not say anything. I did not act from a hospital bed 12 hours post-surgery with 2 newborns. That would not have been fair to any of us. But something shifted. Something quiet and fundamental, the way a load-bearing beam does not collapse all at once. It develops a crack you can no longer pretend you haven't seen. Marcus had taken the Bobbies to the nursery for their overnight checks. The room was almost dark. I lay there with the soreness of surgery in my abdomen and the strange new weight of having become a mother, and I opened my banking app. Not to cancel anything. I opened it the way I always open it when I am anxious, the same way other people check social media. Numbers have always calmed me. They are reliable in a way that people are not. I pulled up the transfers. 9 years of them, scrolling back like reading a timeline of my adult life in row after row of automated generosity. And then I did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I added them up. The app has a feature that is not advertised, but that I know exists because I am the kind of person who reads documentation. A total for filtered transactions by label over a custom date range. I selected Dad Medical. Home support, utilities, I selected 9 years. The number that appeared on that screen, glowing in the dark hospital room with my 2 newborn daughters 40 feet away in the nursery, was $346,800. Nearly $350,000. I put the phone down, I picked it up, I looked again. 340, $6,800. I lay there in the dark and did what I always do when a number does not make sense. I started asking questions. I need to tell you about the 3 weeks that followed, because they are the weeks that changed everything. And they happened quietly, the way the most important things usually do. When I came home from the hospital, Marcus took a reduced schedule. We hired a night nurse for 4 days a week, a practical decision I had new and visceral appreciation for. I was feeding 2 Bobbies, healing from a C-section, and running on the thin, broken sleep of early parenthood. And in the small hours of the night, while both Bobbies slept and Marcus slept and the whole neighborhood slept, I worked. I am, at my core, a revenue cycle administrator. I know medical billing the way a carpenter knows lumber, its grain, its weight, the way it fails when it is stressed beyond what it was designed to hold. So I did something I should have done 9 years before. I requested itemized records. I called my father's neurologist's office, the one in Charlotte that my mother had specifically mentioned in the very first conversation, the one she had cited as the reason the costs were so high. I identified myself as Robert Cartwright's daughter and explained that I was updating my financial records and needed an itemization of his treatment over the past 9 years. There was a pause, then a longer pause. Then the woman on the other end came back careful and deliberate, the way people are when they are about to say something that will matter. "Ma'am, we don't have a Robert Cartwright in our system. We never have." I thanked her and hung up. I sat with that for a moment, just a moment. Then I called the physical therapy practice my mother had referenced. Same answer. The specialist she'd mentioned. Same answer. The home modification company she'd cited for the ramp installation. No record, no records, no record, no record. I pulled up my own documentation. I had 9 years of bank statements. I had the category labels my mother had given me. And I had the addresses associated with the withdrawals and deposits because I am thorough and I keep everything. I built a spreadsheet because I always build a spreadsheet. What assembled itself, column by column, over 3 nights of Ivy and Clara sleeping in 2-hour stretches, was not the picture my mother had been painting for 9 years. Total transfers, $346,800. Documented medical expenses for my father, actual receipts, actual providers, actual verified treatments came to $41,200. His Parkinson's was real. I want to be explicit about this. He had been diagnosed, the tremor was real, the disease was real. But his medication was covered at 80% by insurance, and the specialist he actually used was 40 minutes from the house, accepted their primary insurance, and charged a $30 copay. $11,000 had touched the mortgage over 9 years, not the $100,000+ I'd believed was going there. 11. That left roughly $294,000 that I could not, at first, account for. I filtered by withdrawal location. What emerged was not subtle once I knew to look for it. Clusters of cash withdrawals, dozens of them, at 2 recurring locations. One was a shopping center 40 minutes from my parents' house. The other was a casino on the Virginia-North Carolina border called River's Edge. My mother did not gamble. My mother had told me explicitly, more than once, on specific occasions I could recall, that she considered gambling morally objectionable. She had said this at our kitchen table. She had said it on FaceTime. She had said it in the church parking lot, specifically about my father's old poker nights. She had said it as a statement of character. I sat in my home office at 2 a.m. and looked at the River's Edge casino website for a long time. Then I looked at the shopping center. I used the address to identify what was there: a row of boutiques, a day spa, a high-end salon. I thought about Paige, 28, who somehow maintained professional manicures every 2 weeks and professionally colored hair every 6 weeks despite an employment history that no single position had survived more than 8 months. I filtered the transfers I had labeled home support and utilities, and I traced them more carefully. 22% of that money had been withdrawn as cash within 1 mile of a residential address I did not recognize. I looked up the address. It was an apartment complex in Asheville, North Carolina. Paige had mentioned Asheville twice in the past year, in the way she mentions things, passing, breezy, unanchored. She had called it spending time there. I had assumed she meant visiting friends. I sat in my office chair with the baby monitor casting a blue glow across the desk, and I looked at what the spreadsheet had assembled. My mother had been routing my money through the casino and through my sister for the better part of a decade. She had been telling me a story about medication and need and sacrifice, and I had been sending money into a story that was not true. My father, who sat in that house, who knew the medication bills, who knew the doctors, had never said a word. I printed the spreadsheet, 4 pages, single-spaced, annotated, sourced. The way I would print a report for a board meeting. I put it in a folder on my desk. I did not do anything else that night. People expect rage at this point in a story. They expect a 2 a.m. confrontation call, a screaming match, something immediate and proportionate to the size of the thing discovered. I did not do any of those things. I have twin daughters sleeping 6 feet from me. I have a husband who has been watching me with the quiet concern of a man who knows something has broken and is waiting for me to be ready to name it. And I have spent my entire adult life being the person who does not fall apart in the moment, the person who absorbs what is happening, identifies what can be done, and does it. The first thing I did was call my Aunt Jo. Josephine Cartwright, 64 years old, my father's younger sister, a retired paralegal from Richmond who had spent 30 years in and out of courtrooms and courtroom-adjacent situations and had opinions, developed from evidence about most things. Aunt Jo, who sent me birthday cards with handwritten paragraphs instead of just a check. Aunt Jo, who had said to me at a kitchen sink one Christmas Eve, quiet and direct, "Elise, I worry about how much you carry. You shouldn't have to carry this much alone." I called her on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus had the girls and the house was briefly quiet, and I told her everything. The transfers, the total, the spreadsheet, the records that didn't exist, the casino address, Asheville. She was quiet for a long time. Not the uncomfortable silence of a person who doesn't know what to say, the deliberate silence of a person who is deciding what to say first. "How long have you suspected?" she asked. "Some part of me has probably suspected for years," I said. "I just couldn't afford to look at it directly." "And your father," she said. "How much do you think he knows?" "I don't know," I said. "I need to find out." "You need to find out in a room," she said. "Not on a phone. In a room with everyone present where there's no opportunity for anyone to put the phone down." She asked me what I wanted, not what I was going to do next, not what the practical steps were, what I wanted. I looked at the baby monitor. I thought about Ivy and Clara in the next room, who would grow up knowing this family, who would absorb whatever I modeled about what family means and what you owe the people inside it. "The truth," I said, out loud in a full room. "Then I will drive up for Thanksgiving," she said, "and I will bring my folder." I did not ask what was in the folder. Something in me already understood it was going to matter in ways I couldn't yet see. Before I tell you about Thanksgiving, I need to tell you what happened in the weeks between that phone call and the holiday, because those weeks were their own education. The first of the month came. I sat with my banking app and I looked at the 4 recurring transfers, 4 items I had watched auto-populate on the first of every month for 108 months. I canceled them. 4 taps. Each one produced a small clean notification. Recurring transfer canceled. Recurring transfer canceled. Recurring transfer canceled. Recurring transfer canceled. I felt nothing dramatic. Only that particular flat clarity you feel when a spreadsheet you have been staring at for hours finally balances. The kind of calm that is not peace but is close to it. My mother called on the 3rd. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was warm and slightly bewildered. She didn't want to bother me with the bobbies so new, but the medical billing had come in. I noted, in the part of my brain that never stops auditing things, that she had described asking me for $3,200 as not wanting to bother me. I called her back 2 days later. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. "Honey, the transfer didn't come through. Is everything okay with the account?" I told her the account was fine. I told her the transfers had been canceled. I told her I had been reviewing my finances with the twins, with the pregnancy costs, and needed to restructure. There was a silence, the kind that has weight and texture. Canceled, she repeated. I also called the neurologist in Charlotte, I said. The one you mentioned in the beginning. They don't have a file for Dad. They never have. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of a person who has just understood what kind of conversation they are in. Elise, she started, I'm not sure which office you called. Your father has seen a number of specialists. I called 4 of them, I said. I also called his actual neurologist, the one 40 minutes from your house, who confirmed the insurance covers 80% and the copay is $30. She said nothing. I'm not going to transfer any more money, I said, and I think we should discuss this properly. At Thanksgiving, as a family, Aunt Jo is coming. A pause. Aunt Jo's name in this family carries its own weather system. That might not be the best time, my mother said. The holidays are already stressful. I think it's exactly the right time, I said. She said very quietly, fine. I said, fine. We hung up. I went into the kitchen and I made a cup of tea and I sat in the morning light coming through the window and I looked at my hands around the mug and I felt, for the first time in 9 years, like I was not carrying someone else's story. I was in mine. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Paige called. Paige calling me directly was unusual. She typically communicated through our mother, the way a country routes diplomatic cables, messages arriving pre-framed and pre-softened. My mother would say, Paige mentioned, or I was talking to Paige, using herself as the intermediary to ensure that whatever my sister needed arrived without the friction of having to ask for it. When her name appeared on my phone, I was already paying attention. The call opened with pleasantries, the bobbies, the weather, nothing remarkable. And then she said, Mom mentioned things are a little tight right now with you restructuring your finances. I noted the word restructuring. My mother had taken my language and was deploying it strategically. That's right, I said. The thing is, Paige said, there's this opportunity, in Asheville, a studio space. It's a business investment, really, more than an expense, and if I could just get through this particular month with a bridge kind of. Paige, I said. She stopped. How long has Mom been sending you money from what I was sending her? A pause so complete, I thought the call had dropped. She said it was the family support fund. She said everyone pooled. There is no pool, I said. There's my account and there's your mother's. Silence. Oh, she said. And here is the thing I want to say clearly, because it matters for what came later. I believed her. Not entirely, not without reservation, but in the specific partial way that you believe someone who has just discovered, in real time, that the floor they have been standing on was built by someone they never thought to look for. My sister is not malicious. She is something more frustrating. She is incurious. She has spent her adult life accepting what was placed in front of her without asking who paid for the placing of it. That is its own kind of taking, even when it is not the cruel kind. I need you at Thanksgiving, I said. I need everyone at Thanksgiving. Is this going to be a whole thing? She asked. Yes, I said. It's going to be a whole thing. She came. Aunt Jo arrived the Wednesday before Thanksgiving with a rolling suitcase, a pecan pie, and a manila envelope that she set on my kitchen counter with the deliberate, unhurried care of someone who has been carrying it a very long time and is finally somewhere it can be set down. She held the twins, one at a time. She appraised Marcus with the calibrated attention of a woman who has spent 30 years in legal proceedings and extended this capacity to all aspects of life, and apparently found him satisfactory. She gave a single nod and said, "Good," which I understood was her version of a speech. After the bobbies were down for the night, we sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and she told me what was in the envelope. My grandmother, Edna Cartwright, my father's mother, had passed 4 years ago. I had been told that her estate was modest and had been divided equally between her 2 children. I had not been told what that division included. I had assumed, as I had been guided to assume, that there was very little to divide. Edna had in fact left specific written instructions. Her savings, approximately $180,000, were to be held in trust and distributed equally among her 4 grandchildren for education and life milestones. Equal shares: Dean, me, Paige, and Joe's daughter Miriam. Each of us should have received $45,000. Joe had received her own share because she had managed the probate herself, being a retired paralegal with, as she put it, a healthy professional skepticism of people who say there's nothing to speak of. What she could not prove with certainty, but what she had spent 4 years quietly documenting, was this. My parents had worked with the estate's attorney, a man who had done legal work for my father's employer for decades, to have Paige's share and my share dispersed directly to my parents under the premise that they would manage the funds on our behalf. Which is a legal way of saying that $90,000 intended for 2 of Edna's grandchildren had been redirected to my parents before those grandchildren were ever told it existed. Joe laid the documents on my kitchen table, the probate records, the attorney's correspondence, the disbursement documentation. All of it in the organized, sourced stack of someone who has been building a case with patience and a clear purpose. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she said. "You were in the middle of IVF, then the pregnancy. I didn't want to put this weight on you when you were already carrying so much." She paused. "And because I needed you to find your own thread before I handed you mine. If I had come to you 4 years ago and said your mother took your grandmother's money, you would have found a reason to defend her." I thought about that. She was right, I would have. "Your mother is not a cruel woman," Aunt Jo said. "I want you to understand that I do not believe she is cruel. She is frightened and she is careless with other people's money, and she has never once believed the bill would come due, because it never has." She tapped the envelope. "It is about to." We drove to my parents' house on a Thursday morning. Marcus and the twins and me, with Aunt Jo following in her rental. The twins were 3 months old and had recently developed the ability to regard the world with quiet skepticism, which I found fortifying. My parents' house is a split level in a cul-de-sac that I helped pay the mortgage on for 9 years without ever being given a spare key. I know every crack in that driveway. I know the sound the screen door makes and the way the living room smells in winter. Dean was already there, sitting on the porch eating crackers, and when he saw me coming up the walk, he stood and waved with his whole arm. Not a wave exactly, more of a full-body greeting, and I felt the specific grief of having one family member whose love for you has never been conditional on anything you produce. I hugged him first. I held on longer than I usually would. Paige was inside. She appeared in the doorway when we came in and looked at me, and then at Aunt Jo, and her face moved through 3 or 4 expressions in quick succession, none of them quite landing. She stepped back without saying anything. My father was in his chair in the living room. He is genuinely ill. I want to say that again because it matters. The Parkinson's is real, the tremor is real, and when I saw him that morning, I felt the full complication of the situation settle over me like weather. You can be wronged by someone who is also suffering. The wrongness does not cancel the suffering, and the suffering does not cancel the wrongness. Both things exist. You have to hold both of them and still decide what to do. He looked at me when I came in. He looked at Joe. Something crossed his face that he put away before it could be read. My mother came from the kitchen in an apron, doing the warmth performance she does, and when she saw Aunt Jo, the warmth flickered like a light behind a loose connection. "Joe," she said, "I didn't realize you were driving all this way." "Family occasion," Joe said pleasantly, and set the pecan pie on the counter like she owned the kitchen. We got through the first hour the way you get through these hours. Surface conversation, food preparation. The bobbies passed from lap to lap and admired. My mother held Ivy and made the sounds of a grandmother who means them, and I watched her face while she held my daughter, and it was genuine. That was the cruelest part of the whole day. Her love for those bobbies was entirely real. Her love for me had always been real too. It had simply been conditional in ways she had never been required to examine, until now. After dinner, when the plates had been cleared and Dean had fallen asleep in the recliner, and Paige was quiet and watchful on the couch, I reached into the bag I had placed near my chair, and I took out the folder. I set it on the dining table, not with drama, not with ceremony, the way you set down something heavy after a very long walk. My mother's eyes went to it immediately, which told me she already understood, on some level, what kind of moment this was. "I've done some financial review," I said. "I wanted to share what I found." She started to speak. I kept going. 9 years of transfers, I said. $346,800. I've organized them here by what I was told they were for and what the records actually show. I opened the folder. 4 printed pages, clean and sourced and annotated. The same format I use for board presentations. $41,200 can be documented as actual medical expenses for Dad, I said. That's the verified care, the real prescriptions, the real copies. I let that sit for one beat. $11,000 toward the mortgage across 9 years. I turned the page. The remaining $294,000 is more complicated. I walked through it the way I would walk through any audit finding. Factually, specifically, without adjectives I didn't need. The casino withdrawals, the boutiques and salon visits, the Asheville apartment. The pattern of cash withdrawals that matched, by location and timing, with Paige's mentions of her time there. I did not editorialize. I let the columns do what columns do. Paige had gone very still. Her hands were flat on her knees. I turned to the second section of the folder. "And then there is the estate," I said. "Grandma Edna's estate." I watched my father's face when I said those words. Something moved behind his eyes, brief and involuntary, and he put it away. But I had seen it. I have spent my career watching people's faces when a number appears that they were hoping would not. "Dad," I said, "how much of what Grandma left was supposed to come to me?" The room held that question. My mother opened her mouth. "Don't," I said to her. Just the one word, quiet and direct. She closed it. My father looked at his hands. The tremor was visible in his left one. He has been a quiet man for as long as I have known him, not from wisdom, but from the long habit of a man who learned, somewhere in 40 years of marriage, that the safest thing to do in his own house was nothing at all. He looked up. 45,000, he said. His voice was thin, but it was steady. "There should have been 45,000 for you from your grandmother." My mother made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, the kind that comes when a person realizes that the person they counted on to stay quiet has chosen not to. "Robert," she started. "I should have told you." He was looking at me, not at her, at me. "When your mother suggested managing it, she said you had enough and we needed a cushion, and I knew it wasn't right, but He stopped. He looked back at his hands. "I let her tell the story. For a long time, I let her tell the story." The room was very quiet. Ivy made a small sound from her portable crib and then went still again. Aunt Jo, who had not said a word through all of this, reached into her bag and placed her own folder beside mine on the table. The probate records, the disbursement documentation, the attorney correspondence, organized with 30 years of professional precision. "The paperwork is all here, Elise," she said, "in case anyone wants to verify." My mother stood. She had been seated and now she stood, and she moved through the stages fast, warmth to surprise to denial to something harder and more afraid. She is a gifted performer, and she opened strong. "This is private family business. You do not bring this to a table like a legal proceeding. This is our family." "It became something of a legal proceeding," Aunt Jo said pleasantly, "when you signed your daughter's inheritance over to yourselves. We were managing it." "There is nothing to manage," Jo said, "in an account that was never opened." My mother turned to me. Her eyes were wet now, and I recognized from 36 years of proximity that the tears were partly real and partly deployed. She is not calculating in a premeditated way. She finds the path of least resistance the way water does, not through strategy but through nature. It is simply what she knows. After everything I did for you, she said, and her voice had gone soft and wounded. I worked 2 jobs when you were small so we could stay in that house. I drove you to every practice, every appointment, and you come here on Thanksgiving and you do this to me in front of everyone. I had prepared things to say. I had drafted responses in my phone at 3 in the morning while feeding Clara, the way I draft everything, methodically, specifically, with edits. None of them felt right now that the moment was actually in front of me. So I said the only thing that was true. Mom, I said, I spent 9 years sending that money because I loved you and because I wanted Dad to have what he needed. I was not doing it to be repaid. I was not doing it to be thanked or recognized or remembered. I did it because I thought it was helping. I paused. But you let me believe it was going to his medication when it wasn't. You let me believe there was nothing left from Grandma when there was $45,000 with my name on it. And when I was in a hospital bed 12 hours after having emergency surgery to deliver my daughters, who were 40 feet away in the nursery, you called to ask whether the transfer had gone out. She had no answer. She looked for one and it wasn't there. I am not here to punish you, I said. I am here because Ivy and Clara are going to grow up knowing this family, and I need to know what this family actually is. Not the version that gets performed for neighbors, the actual one. And then Paige surprised me. She had been so quiet for so long that I had almost stopped accounting for her. She set her phone face down on the couch cushion. She looked at our mother, and her face held something I had never seen there before, something younger and less protected. Mom, she said, the money you were sending me, the studio, the Asheville apartment, that was Elise's. My mother looked at her daughter. Did you know, Paige said, when you told me it was the family support fund, did you know the whole time it was hers? My mother said nothing, and as silences go, that one was complete. Paige looked down at her hands. Then she looked at me. Something moved across her face, the specific and uncomfortable recognition of a person who has been comfortable at someone else's expense and has not, until this moment, been required to know it. The dawning of a debt she had not known she was accumulating. I'm sorry, she said, just to me quietly. It was not enough to fix anything. It did not resolve or restore or undo. But in a room full of things that had been performed for 30 years, it was real. And in that moment, real was the rarest thing available. I nodded. My mother sat back down. The performance deflated rather than collapsed, the way it does when an audience leaves not through argument but through simple refusal to respond to what is being shown. She looked older. She looked tired. She looked, for the first time in my life, like someone who was not entirely certain the story she had been telling was the true one. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. There was no cleanness to it, no satisfaction. There was a room full of people sitting with a truth that had been rerouted around for 30 years. And all of us with the same unasked question, what do we do with it tomorrow? Here is how things settled, because I know that is what you want to know. Aunt Jo stayed through the weekend. She connected me with an estate attorney about my grandmother's inheritance. There are options, though none of them are uncomplicated, and I have accepted that a portion of what was taken may not be practically recoverable. But the documentation exists. My mother knows it exists. That is, in its own way, a thing that changes the shape of the room. I reinstated partial financial support for my father's actual medical expenses. He is ill, and I am not in the business of abandoning a sick parent to prove a point. But I established it through a separate account, managed jointly by Aunt Jo as co-signatory, with verified receipts required for every disbursement. My mother's name is not on it. She accepted this arrangement in the silence of someone who has, for the first time, run out of moves and understands that she has. Paige has a job now, a real one, at a graphic design firm in Asheville that she found through her own effort and her own network and her own portfolio. She called me to tell me about it, and she sounded like a different version of herself. Slightly uncertain, slightly proud in a way she had never needed to be before because pride requires having done something yourself. I did not say what I was thinking. I let the discovery be hers. My father calls every other Sunday, short calls. He asks about the twins by name, in the correct order, which I know because I told him their names twice slowly on Thanksgiving and he wrote them down. The last time we spoke, he mentioned that he'd found some of my grandmother's old photographs, her garden, her kitchen, her face when she was young, and asked if he could send prints for the girls when they were old enough to understand them. I said yes. We both understood that was the right answer. My mother has not called since Thanksgiving. Aunt Jo tells me she is, in the language of their relationship, reconsidering her position. I think what she is actually doing is waiting to discover whether silence will work now the way warmth and guilt and performance no longer do. I think she may be waiting for a long time. Ivy and Clara are 6 months old. They have developed the ability to look at each other across a room with an expression that suggests ongoing negotiation about something that does not involve the rest of us. I support it fully. I have thought a great deal, in the months since Thanksgiving, about why I let this go on for 9 years. Not from self-punishment, I have spent enough hours in therapy to know the difference between examination and flogging. But because the answer to that question is useful, and I want to give it to you in case it is useful to you. I let it go on because somewhere in my childhood I had confused being needed with being safe. If I was the one carrying the weight, no one could remove me from the structure. If I was the load-bearing wall, I was, in some logic I had never examined out loud, indispensable. The family could not fall if I was what it was built on. What I had not understood, until a hospital room at midnight with 2 new lives in bassinets near me and a phone call I should never have received, was that load-bearing walls do not get chosen for their strength. They get chosen because they are already there, already standing, already holding. And the people who build on them rarely think about what it costs the wall. Being needed is not the same as being loved. I had confused them for 36 years. Being the reliable one is not the same as being valued. I had confused those two. And being calm is not the same as being fine. That one took the longest to understand. I am still the person who handles things. That is not something I intend to change. It is genuinely who I am, and I have learned to stop apologizing for it. But I have stopped handling things for people who are capable of handling them for themselves. I have stopped writing checks to cover stories I was not allowed to fact-check. And I have stopped calling my own abandonment love because I finally have 2 people to show what love actually looks like, and I would like to get it right for them. $346,800, $4 printed pages, 1 Thanksgiving dinner, and an old woman named Edna Cartwright who left $45,000 to a granddaughter she believed in, and whose faith was the last thing anyone thought to protect. I keep a photo of her on my desk now. I found it in the envelope of prints my father sent. She is in her garden, late summer, from the light, and she is looking at something just outside the frame, and she is almost smiling. I like to think she knew I would get there eventually. If any part of this found you in the right moment, if you are the one who handles things, the one whose steadiness everyone calls a gift while quietly spending it, then do the one thing I kept putting off. Pull one statement. Just one. Read it like it belongs to someone else, because the person you were when you started sending the money may not be the person you are now. The account is closed. The story is done. And I am sitting in my kitchen at 6 in the morning while 2 people who are entirely new to the world sleep in the next room, and the quiet, for the first time I can remember, is mine. That is my story. Subscribe if this reached you at the right moment. Drop a comment and tell me about the person who showed up when no one else would. And if you know someone who has been the reliable one for too long, share this with them. They may be waiting for permission to stop. I will see you in the next one.